Welcome back to Sissy Maya. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to never miss an update. Additionally, consider subscribing to my Patreon to get access to these features, and much more. I know many of you are drawn to the allure of tight-fitting corsets, whether to shape your figure into a more feminine form or to seek out a partner who will guide and encourage you, even with a bit of persuasion. Combining the strictness of a dominant woman with the demanding constraints of a corset comes at a cost. For me, that cost has been losing control over my own fate and having my body reshaped by the rigorous discipline of corset training, something I cannot and do not wish to escape. In my early teens, I found my sister's underwear irresistibly fascinating. The delicate, ephemeral garments displayed on laundry day enchanted me. With my father absent for years, I was the only male in a household of my mother and two older sisters. As I grew older, I learned to hide my interest from friends and carefully select items to borrow from my sister's drawer. By my mid-teens, I habitually wore a bra and panties to bed, managing to avoid detection. This might have remained a secret, but everything changed when I discovered an old Victorian magazine in a junk shop shortly after my 18th birthday. The women depicted were very different from the modern females in skimpy outfits. They were robust figures, obviously controlled by their corsets. The magazine spoke of the struggle between the desire for smaller waists and the corset's constricting hold. It mentioned fainting, training, permanent shaping, and the need to wear the corset constantly. There were descriptions of styles, from full-length garments to waist-cinching corsets and various training and sleeping styles that intrigued and overwhelmed my youthful curiosity. Around my 18th birthday, my father briefly returned to offer congratulations. "Take me out for drinks, that's what fathers are for," he had said to my surprised mother as he pushed a very inebriated me through the door, only to disappear again. He also gave me a check, an amount my mother would have insisted I return. Even in my drunken state, I felt a strange urge to explore what pleasures that money might offer. Back then, there were no shops, magazines, or discreet advertisements catering to men seeking femininity. The thought of discussing such interests with a girl would likely have led to bewilderment if I could have overcome my shyness. Ultimately, it was my involvement with the Scouts and Guides that set me on this path, an adventure or a slippery slope, depending on your perspective. Our annual holiday was typically a joint Scout and Guide camp on a windswept headland overlooking the North Sea. That year, with the Scout camp cancelled due to mumps, my mother decided I should visit an aunt in London. "You're too thin. At least you haven't got that horrible acne. It's a shame you aren't taller." Aunt Helen was known for her sharp remarks, but when I arrived, it was clear that my chance might come as she was in the midst of one of her well-known passions. A widow, she had fewer of the societal constraints typical of her generation and entertained gentlemen friends regularly. Thus, I was left to manage on the top floor of her house, with meals being the only exception. I had brought my post office savings book, naively believing that having money meant I could fulfill my unformed fantasies. I managed to venture into central London on the first 2 days but found myself too inexperienced to find what I only vaguely desired and too timid to ask for help. On the third day, events unfolded quickly, leaving me little time to reflect. After returning late from my second trip into town, I initially thought I had angered Aunt Helen, but it became clear that her latest interest had fizzled out. At breakfast the next morning, Aunt Helen revealed a shocker. She had been in my room the previous afternoon to tidy up and discovered not only the bra and panties I had brought with me but also the Victorian magazine I had been studying. As I flushed with embarrassment, she interrogated me sternly, determined to get answers. I admitted to my fascination and fantasies, and as I overcame my initial discomfort, I realized her questioning was more than just disapproval. It had evolved into a conversation and a shared interest, as she subtly invited me to expand my understanding. This marked my entry into two new realms, the world of tight lacing and adulthood, as I found an adult willing to engage with me as an equal. "I've had gentlemen friends who found it thrilling to see me in a corset," Aunt Helen said. "One even found wearing something of mine quite stimulating." Although our relationship had not ventured into adult matters, Aunt Helen continued, I wonder if you'd like to try one on? You're quite slim, like I was when I was younger. I still have the corset I wore for my wedding. It's not tailored for you, but it might fit. Whether we fully understood what we were embarking upon is doubtful. Aunt Helen's intention was simply to assist me in exploring my own interests, just as she was recovering from her recent passion for a gentleman friend. It was a gesture of genuine curiosity and support. I'm grateful to her for her gentle and understanding approach over the next few days. The corset was white, adorned with pearls, and extended from just below my armpits to the top of my hips, lacking the cups of a bra. 8 delicately decorated suspenders hung from the sides. Now, do you really want to try this on? She asked. I nodded, hesitantly. I need you to understand that if you want to wear this corset, you must accept that it's for a specific purpose, and I won't assist unless we do it properly. If it's worth doing well. I didn't fully grasp what she meant, but my dream was within reach, and I would have agreed to anything at that moment. To avoid any awkwardness over nudity, my aunt sent me to my room to undress, instructing me to come to her bedroom wearing one of her robes and the knickers I had brought. They were old control knickers, which I appreciated for their modesty, as I was concerned my youthful enthusiasm might cause embarrassment. The corset surprised me with its firmness. As Aunt Helen fastened the front and began adjusting the laces, I was taken aback by its tight grip. That's enough for now, dear. You've gone quite red. 3 inches is sufficient for the first time, and there's still more to go. I was surprised by how breathless I felt and how the corset's grip was uncomfortable but not painful. Aunt Helen asked how I felt, and after I told her, she smiled and directed me to sit on the bed. She then used an old pair of her stockings to attach to the corset suspenders, and I felt the taut pull as she helped me to my feet. Although her dainty size 3 shoes wouldn't fit me, she helped me struggle into a pair of pink, fluffy-heeled mules in size 5. She then draped a silky scarlet kimono over me, and I spent the next 3 hours walking between her bedroom and mine, practicing moving in the unfamiliar clothes. Aunt Helen stayed close by, observing and encouraging me. She taught me how to stand, sit gracefully, and walk in the heels. There was no question of removing the corset. Her new passion had to succeed. As lunchtime approached, she explained that I couldn't eat the substantial meal I was used to because she planned to tighten the corset another inch or so. I had to make do with soup, which was taken from me once for not following her instructions on how to eat it. After tightening the corset another inch, Aunt Helen asked if I wanted to continue the next day. My sides and back ached, my ankles were sore, but the initial breathlessness had eased. Her explanation that if I declined, I wouldn't get another chance persuaded me to agree. It was surprising when she mentioned other items I would need, explaining she intended to let me experience life as a corseted girl if that was my choice. This would require underwear, age-appropriate modern clothing, shoes, and what she called other bits and pieces. She asked if I was ready to spend all the money my father had given me, noting that although it was substantial, she would need to contribute as well, as she wasn't willing to compromise. Another shock came at bedtime. Although I was temporarily freed from the corset to bathe, it was under close supervision. My aunt disregarded my masculinity entirely, and after being thoroughly dried, powdered, and creamed, I was recorseted even more tightly than before. The suspenders were removed, and a simple white cotton shift was placed over my head. The fantasy had shifted to reality as I was instructed on how a young lady should conduct herself. That night, I heard the phone and overheard my mother being told that Aunt Helen and I were getting along famously and that she wanted me to stay another week. The next morning, I learned that Aunt Helen had told my mother she was finding me a job in London and that there was a chance I might not return home at all. In the 2 days I waited to withdraw my cash from the post office, my life transformed. The corset was gradually tightened until it couldn't be closed any further, sculpting a figure that drew admiration from Aunt Helen and kept me mesmerized in front of the mirror, contemplating how to enhance the shape before me. Those days felt slow, but I now realize they were the first time I felt genuine enthusiasm and received encouragement. My self-perception and attitude toward my body shifted dramatically. I yearned to be clean, sought stylish clothing, secretly desired longer hair, and wished for a more defined chest. I spoke incessantly about these desires, asking about the next tightening of the corset, when I could get my own shoes, the possibility of using makeup, wearing proper underwear, and many other details. Aunt Helen answered my questions, encouraged me, and posed her own inquiries. I had never talked so much before, and each question and answer fueled our shared passion. Eventually, Aunt Helen went shopping to fulfill my deepest wishes. When Aunt Helen returned from her shopping trip, I was disheartened to see only 3 small bags. The disappointment must have been evident, but Aunt Helen reassured me, saying softly, "There's more to come, but these are the most important items." Without further discussion, she led me upstairs and instructed me to undress. There was no embarrassment on her part as she meticulously plucked my eyebrows, waxed my legs, removed the light fuzz from my underarms, and shaved my pubic hair, leaving my skin as smooth as a baby's. By the time I emerged from a bath, the contents of the parcels were laid out on the bed, except for one 8-inch square box which remained sealed. Among the items were black 4-inch court shoes, black seamed stockings, and a delicate lace G-string, surprisingly effective at concealing any trace of masculinity. The final item was a black leather pencil skirt, at least one full size too small for me. I was nearly in tears, anticipating the experience of the soft leather hugging my thighs and legs, forcing me to take tiny steps. "Would you like to try it on?" Aunt Helen asked. I nodded. "Come on, let me help you with your makeup, and then we'll get you ready for your interview." "Interview?" I inquired, but Aunt Helen remained focused as she applied my makeup, indulged me with body lotion, and ensured my toenails and fingernails were beautifully polished. Just as she finished, the doorbell rang. She instructed me to borrow her silk robe after I had carefully put on the stockings and used her old-fashioned garters to hold them up. I assumed a tradesman had arrived, but my first hint that something more was happening came when the doorbell rang again, and a second person entered. I sneaked to the top of the stairs and heard 3 women chatting softly. Aunt Helen reappeared at the bedroom door shortly after I had returned and smiled sweetly. Behind her stood a petite figure dressed entirely in black. Even in extraordinarily high heels, she barely reached 5 feet. Everything about her was impeccable, from her raven pageboy haircut to the high-necked black top that clung from her throat to her tiny waist. The leather jacket and matching pencil skirt she wore mirrored the skirt lying on the bed behind me. Her eyes locked onto mine with an almost hypnotic intensity before she scanned my entire body. She then pulled the tie on my robe and retrieved a tape measure, carefully noting my measurements. Throughout this process, she remained silent, while Aunt Helen observed from the background, seemingly waiting for any sign of approval or disapproval. A small nod from the diminutive figure was followed by her turning back to me. "I understand you have an interest in wearing corsets," she inquired, and I nodded, too nervous to speak. "Why is that?" she asked. I stammered about the shaping, support, and desire for admiration, to which she nodded in understanding. "I'd like to offer you an apprenticeship. Accept my offer, work diligently, and learn the trade, and you will secure a job for life." I stared at her in disbelief, and Aunt Helen stepped in. "Madame Sable is a courtier. She's offering you a 7-year apprenticeship." My mind struggled to process the information. Madame Sable continued, "Would you like to see some of my work? In fact, I've brought a corset for you to try on. I'm sure you'd enjoy that, wouldn't you?" I managed a timid nod. She revealed a stunning corset in black, shiny material, designed to be eye-catching with its bra cups but lacking shoulder straps. As she wrapped it around me, it not only embraced my waist and chest but also my hips, with 6 suspenders hanging enticingly. The fitting process was intricate. She loosened the laces and unclipped the front fastenings. The mysterious package's contents, silicone forms, were inserted before the corset was drawn tight over my body. The cold, rigid boning pressed against me, and I gasped as the laces were pulled tight. The initial tug constricted my body from hips to chest, making it difficult to breathe. Madame Sable adjusted the corset to ensure a perfect fit and balanced laces. Excellent, dear. Now, breathe in, and I'll take it in a bit more, she instructed. As the corset tightened, I came perilously close to fainting for the first time, though not the last. Madame Sable quickly measured me, expressed her satisfaction, and congratulated me with a pat on the hand. She then knelt to attach the suspenders to my stockings and handed me a leather skirt with a smile. The skirt, with its sensuous feel, heightened my awareness as it slid over my hips and was fastened by Aunt Helen. It rested just below my now tiny waist, gently caressing my thighs and legs, and as I took a step, I discovered it restricted my stride to 6 inches or less. After a brief lesson on walking and a touch-up of my makeup, I was guided to the stairs and instructed on how to descend safely. Throughout this, the skirt sensuously brushed my thighs and the corset tightly controlled my body. Overwhelmed by the sensations, I was barely aware of my surroundings. I felt euphoric, beyond words. As I entered the living room, I was jolted by the presence of an unexpected guest, my mother. My initial pleasure turned to sheer embarrassment as I felt my cheeks flush with color, wishing I could vanish into the floor. Well, Helen, I guess this explains why my underwear kept disappearing, though I never imagined it would lead to this. She giggled, causing me further discomfort. Looks absolutely stunning, and that figure. Both of the girls will be envious. She stood up and approached me. Aren't you going to give your mother a kiss and say hello? Despite being dressed as I was, her embrace was less awkward than it would have been before, and her enthusiastic praise for my appearance brought me a sense of pride. As my mother continued, Madame Leclerc interjected to explain the apprenticeship's requirements and benefits. The initial years would involve observing and learning, acting as a model and stand-in for client fittings. There were both female and male courtiers, but clients tended to prefer one gender over the other. Madame had struggled to find an apprentice as modern girls were unwilling to commit to 7 years of training or endure extreme corseting. Aunt Helen's inquiries and her description of my enthusiasm had led Madame to assess me and extend the offer. After discussions among the 3 women, my opinion was solicited, though the outcome seemed predetermined. I was to live above Madame's shop, as she did, with a living allowance and a clothing budget. My mother signed the apprenticeship agreement alongside me, and I left Aunt Helen's house to begin a new job and a new life. The initial phase of my apprenticeship felt unusual. Madame, though strict, was kind and encouraged me to expand my education beyond corsetry. Since I was on call as her female model and assistant 6 days a week, wearing male clothes became impractical. As I was continually corseted tighter on my days off, my male clothes no longer fit properly. By the end of my first year, there were 3 significant events that led me to wear male clothes only rarely. Madame was invited to an important exhibition at the end of my first year. About 6 months prior, she expressed concern that I might struggle to maintain my female role with the silicone forms, no matter how impressive. I began taking Madame's little pills, which initially limited my facial and body hair and eventually contributed to my 38C bust, of which I am quite proud, especially when corseted to a 19-inch waist. In the early days, I would visit my mother and sisters as their son-brother, but I grew self-conscious about the stares from fellow passengers who were confused by my appearance. There were unpleasant remarks and a few moments where I felt threatened. Madame, understanding of my situation, helped design a corset to be worn with skin-tight jeans and boots, giving a more modern look. From then on, I visited home as a girl, facing few issues other than occasional unwanted attention from young men, which I learned to handle quickly. I came to love my job, relishing the feeling of the corset's embrace as my waist and figure improved. Though I longed for a tighter corset, Madame set a limit to allow for a potential return to a male life. I now go without a corset for less than an hour, usually only while bathing or exercising. Madame and I help each other in and out of our morning and evening corsets, transitioning into our sleeping corsets. I cherish the tight embrace and have a collection of a dozen corsets, each eager to shape and compress my figure. As my apprenticeship nears its end next week, Madame has made me an appealing offer. But what do I want? For 7 years, I've lived as a girl.
I've been approached by female clients, with subtle hints that Madam had forewarned me about, and gentlemen who, though polite when rebuffed, were less discreet. Both groups assumed I was female, but what am I truly? Whether Madam's little pills have affected my masculinity or whether I simply can't bear to part with my beloved corsets, I find I don't want to be what I'm not. Madam knows an excellent and understanding doctor. That Victorian magazine I discovered years ago shaped my destiny, and now I realize I don't want to escape it.